So we're pleased to have with us Marcus Velez tonight. Do I say that right, Marcus?
Vélez.
Velez?
Fellas.
Velez. And we will hopefully be welcoming Ms. Courtney Head here in a few moments. But let's go ahead and stop the screen share so everyone can get a look at Marcus. We'll put the spotlight on him. There we are. And so Marcus, thank you again for joining us. It's awesome. And Marcus Velez is an advocate for working people, and he has spent more than a decade with the United Steelworkers, bargaining for safer conditions, fair pay, and stronger benefits. So, Marcus, would you please tell us why you should be Lieutenant Governor, our next Lieutenant Governor?
Sure. So thank you guys so much for having me. My name is Marcos Velez. Uh, so grew up just outside of Houston, industrial town, Pasadena. After high school, went to go work in an oil refinery. Got really actively involved in organized labor. I realized very quickly that while I enjoyed the industrial work, it was dangerous, and the company had very little care for our overall safety. They treated us the same way I'd treat a cheap tool. They used us till we were no good, and really, had no problem tossing us away. Very quickly after starting my career, saw some pretty debilitating injuries, fatalities, things that really changed my perspective on the workplace. And so got involved from a health and safety perspective, but that passion of advocating for people and fighting for my coworkers grew into a career. Was elected as president of the group, then of the local union, then went to go work for the international union. And now I serve as the assistant director for the United Steelworkers in District 13, where I'm over Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Aruba. And we bargain pay, working conditions, healthcare plans, retirement benefits, retiree healthcare, things that I believe all Texans deserve, but we don't currently have. And so I'm running for lieutenant governor because I've watched the economic situation in Texas reach a point where young people don't have the same opportunities that I had. Retirees are staying in the workforce longer and longer. Homeowners are being pushed out of their homes due to rising cost. And I see the most marginalized members of our community being targeted in these culture wars by our current politicians instead of them focusing on things that would benefit everyday Texans. And so understanding that the lieutenant governor is basically the president of the Texas Senate and prioritizes what legislation will move in the Texas Senate. I believe that we need a normal everyday person, not a millionaire, not a billionaire, running the state of politics for the state of Texas so that we can advance things like raising the state minimum wage, expanding healthcare access, fully funding our public schools, and ensuring that we promote legislation that benefits the people that built this state and not the special interest that has bought it. And so that's just a short summary of why I'm running. Very honored to be here with you guys tonight, and thank you so much for allowing me this platform.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I appreciate your comments very much. So we'll start some questions. If you're just joining us, please feel free to go to the polls and quizzes and choose a couple of your best questions. You might have to do it twice. So go in and vote. Something weird with the poll, don't ask me. I don't do tech. And vote one time, then come in and vote again. But let's see right now. Bear with me while I do a little count here. So it would seem our numero uno question here is on school vouchers. Gee, that's a popular subject. We did an entire town hall on that a year ago. So, Marcus, would you use the lieutenant governor's power over the Senate to permanently block voucher schemes in a chamber that has historically supported them? If so, how?
Sure. So I would. I find it a disservice to our children that we've taken $1 billion out of public education that serves all Texans and really shifted it to a couple of our or special interest buddies of Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott. When you look at the how, the lieutenant governor is over the budget. And so first and foremost, we wouldn't approve a budget that's robbing money from our children, but also when we look at what we can do from a legislative standpoint, I would support and prioritize legislation that puts us back in the other direction. The other thing we have to look at is the fact that while we've stripped $1 billion out of public education. The state has carried over a surplus for several years. I believe the last reported amount was close to $30 billion. And so I would lean heavily into legislation that would shift some of that money back into public education until we close the gap. While Texas continues to complain about the total dollar amount that we spend on public education, we never look at the dollars per student. Because the population has expanded, we do spend a good amount of money on public education, but the dollars per student are significantly lower than states that are performing much better, like Massachusetts. And so we have to increase the dollars per student spent on education, along with shifting some funds to ensure that there's not any gaps. And so, hey, look, funding public education is a huge priority, and I do not support the voucher scam.
Thank you, Marcus. I hate to hit you with another question right after that, rapid fire, but we're going to
Let's
do
do
it
it.
in the current situation. So I think the number two question was on Medicaid expansion. Marcus,
Awesome.
sorry.
Oh, I said awesome.
Okay, I was going to say, so if you favor expanding Medicaid in Texas, how would you convince a potentially Republican-controlled Senate that Medicaid expansion is a fiscally responsible move for the state?
Sure. And look, as someone that bargains healthcare in organized labor, and we have some of the most generous healthcare plans in the industry, good healthcare lowers cost. When people are able to get preventative care before it turns into a major healthcare issue, it actually lowers the cost for the entire plan. The other thing that we've seen is the more people you cover, you lower the cost of healthcare because you have a bigger experience pool that they're basing that coverage on. And so I think we have to convince these conservative senators or state senators that their rural constituents that largely support them are the ones that are the most seriously impacted by these cuts to healthcare spending in the state and by the lack of healthcare access. And so, one, we would start by trying to have constructive dialogue, but ultimately you wield the power of the gavel in the Texas Senate and you make sure that they understand that healthcare is a right, it's non-negotiable, and we're going to prioritize legislation that expands access because it's actually fiscally responsible, it lowers the cost, and it's a public service.
Thank you, sir. And the next question is on abortion access. In a
Sure.
post-Roe legal landscape, what specific legislative steps would you take to ensure reproductive health care is accessible in Texas?
So look, it's a right. It's a shame that we've politicized this issue. I think we have to repeal the civil bounties that they've put out there, right? We have to make sure that legislatively we protect doctors' rights to practice medically necessary care. And then we have to prioritize legislation that returns those rights at a statewide level and put pressure through the public because right now a lot of the Senate's deals are operated in silence or behind closed doors, hidden from the public. And so by allowing the press access to the Senate floor and by using a building power type campaign of including everyday constituents in the discussions that are occurring, making sure that they understand which state senators are the ones opposing the advancement of legislation that codifies those rights as state law, we can put enough pressure on the Texas Senate to ensure those rights are returned to women across the state.
Thank you, Marcus. On water scarcity, water scarcity is a large and growing problem in Texas because of climate change, increasing population, and development of thirsty data centers. What specific conservation mandates or incentives, whether conservation or increasing supply, would you propose to address Texas's long-term water needs?
Sure. I think the first thing that we have to look at, we have to heavily regulate AI data centers. I don't believe that regulation is the solution to everything, but when you look at AI data centers that come in and they exploit our ground soil, they ruin our groundwater, and they suck up way more water than your average citizen would use, we have to have very strong regulatory protections when it comes to AI data centers. We should regulate where they can be built, how much water they can consume, and how they have to ensure that they meet much stricter environmental protection standards. Beyond that, we have to ensure that billionaires cannot take advantage of the right to capture. I support the right to capture as someone that understands that rural Texans need to be able to pull as much water as possible to sustain their ranches and their farms. But billionaires should not be able to come to Texas and dig wells that go 1,000 feet deeper than the deepest well that a normal Texan can dig. And so for citizens and private use, I don't believe there should be limitation. But for corporations and out-of-state entities, I don't think they should be able to dig wells, suck our water out, and take it across state lines. And so we could also look at technologies like desalination where it makes sense. There have been places where that's been tried and, with mixed results. But also we have to look at strengthening incentives for conservation. So protecting the water that we have, strengthening the benefits for conservation and ensuring that we protect Texans' access but box out big business.
Okay. Thank you, Marcus. On ballot initiatives, do you favor enabling non-constitutional ballot initiatives in Texas? If so, what specific topics do you believe should be high priorities for a direct public vote?
Yes, sir. I do. I think the two biggest ones, and they kind of rub the right the wrong way. I support the legalization of marijuana, and I also support the legalization of gambling in the state of Texas. I believe both of them could produce significant tax revenue that could go to funding our public school system and lowering the property tax burden for everyday Texans. It's no secret that the state of Texas doesn't maintain their fair share of cost when it comes to school funding. A lot of states have a 50-50 split. Texas does not. And so, one, the state needs to carry its fair share, but we could reduce that 50-50 split even further by opening up new revenue streams by the legalization of gambling and marijuana. And so I do support those initiatives.
Thank you, Marcus. Change gears a little bit. What would you say to a person who claimed to you that there are only two genders?
So I think I would look that person in the eye and I would tell them that gender is a social construct. I respect their opinion, but it's really something that we shouldn't even be debating in this day and age. I mean, people are people and they should be treated as such.
Okay, thank you. On housing affordability is a big problem, not just in Texas, but across the country. What would you do to make more affordable housing available to people while not impacting negatively, not bringing down property values for existing homeowners? There's a tension there. How would you manage that, Marcus?
I think we increase incentives for developers that actually build housing that meets the threshold for low cost sustainable housing. And I think we offer incentives for them to do that in areas that are underdeveloped. We also have to make sure that when we do that, we protect the existing homeowners. I believe that we could legislatively protect existing homeowners so they're not forced out through what we would call gentrification, but we're still able to build, affordable housing in some, I guess, underinvested neighborhoods.
Okay, and a sort of a related question, I guess. How would you reform property tax law to be fairer to all Texans? And in particular, how can renters enjoy the tax breaks given to Texas homeowners?
Sure. I think that and a lot of people don't understand renters pay property taxes. They pay it through their monthly rent assessments. But I think the easiest way that we could fix the system for everyone is by legalizing new revenue streams like marijuana and gambling, and ensuring that we protect the use of that tax revenue in the state constitution so that we fund education, and make sure that any excess revenue is used to lower the burden on people's property tax assessments. I think we also have to make sure that anytime the state surplus reaches a certain level, that we pass those savings on to homeowners and renters. And I also believe that we could use that revenue that sits in surplus in the state budget to further increase incentives for developers to build affordable housing, which just through the law of supply and demand would add even more relief. And so, multi-pronged approach, but I believe there's a lot of solutions out there. We just don't have politicians that are interested in addressing it.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Grid reliability. What should be done to improve the reliability of the Texas power grid?
As a union man, it's frustrating watching our power grid. If you cut the IBW loose on that grid, they could have it fixed in no time. I think we have to understand that while Texas is a state that is propped up by oil, and I'm an oil worker, former oil worker myself, we should not allow special interest to prevent us from migrating into the future. And so there is a way that we can have a just transition where we adopt an all of the above energy policy and we invest in solar, in wind, and still respect the members of our community that work in oil. I believe that if we actually invest in renewables and allow solar and wind to be used to prop the grid up, we can increase our power reserves and we can ensure that Texans have a more reliable grid. But we also have to invest in the infrastructure of the grid, and that's not currently happening. That burden should be carried by the state. It should not be carried by Texans through their ERCOT assessments. We could go on and on and on about the changes that need to occur with the ERCOT board. I think all of them, as a union man, those are probably the only people next to Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott I think need to be fired. Hey, toss them out. And we need a whole new board, and we could go on and on, but I mean, I think those are some initial solutions.
Great. Thank you, Marcus. On Senate leadership. Okay. So if elected and if by the grace of history, we elect a Democratic state Senate majority, would you include Republicans as committee chairs? So in other words, would you continue to allow bipartisan committee chairs in the Senate, even with a Democratic majority in the chamber?
Look, unpopular opinion, but probably not. I feel like one of the biggest mistakes we make as Democrats is we're always capitulating to the Republican Party. When they have a majority, they don't try to play fair. At the end of the day, if we're going to move a progressive agenda that benefits all working Texans, we need people in positions of power that align with our beliefs and unapologetically fight for those beliefs. And so, in the one-off chance that there's a Republican that's willing to raise the state minimum wage, fight to expand healthcare access, fight to preserve people's rights, not opposed to having a discussion with them, but I haven't seen that person yet. And so, my initial answer is no.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we're actually at the last question, Marcus, which is on campaign finance.
Yes,
And
sir.
I've learned in the state of Texas, with the exception of certain judicial campaign finance laws and the limitation on donating to a legislator in a certain window before and after the legislative session. Beyond those, there's like no campaign finance laws in the state of Texas. So what would you as Lieutenant Governor do to advance campaign finance reform, including dark money, or would you want to improve campaign finance law?
We have to, and here's why. As a normal, everyday working Texan running for office, the number one reason we don't see more normal people running for political office is the barrier to entry through cost. This is one of the most expensive endeavors I have ever witnessed in my life. And I bargain with some of the largest multinational corporations in the world. It's financially impossible for a normal person to run for office. You got a $3,750 filing fee. You need about $1 million to be effective in a statewide general election. $10 million a primary, $10 million to win a general election. And so, and those are just conservative figures. Really, if you're facing some of these bigger names like Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott, you need even more money, right? And so I believe that one, we have to cap the amount of money that people can donate to these campaigns. I believe that we have to have more transparency in where the money comes from. We need to overturn Citizens United at a federal level. We need to make sure that at the state level, we have our own limitations to ensure that candidates have the same set budget caps for each race. And I think those caps should be set relatively low because at the end of the day, until we make the playing field level where normal people can run for office, we are never going to get the leaders we deserve.
Thank you very much, Marcus Velez. Would you care to take a minute to give a final closing statement, sir?
Sure. Hey, look, it's really hard to get to know a candidate through a couple of Q&As. And so I'd really be honored if you guys would go check out either our social media or my website, velezfortexas.com. Just a normal working class guy that spent my adult life fighting for working class people. I genuinely believe that all people being able to house themselves, all people being able to eat, funding public schools, respecting teachers through respectable salaries, women having bodily autonomy, those should not be radical ideas. And the fact that those ideas sound radical to some people in this day and age show us how far we've drifted from the ideals that make this nation great. And so be honored if you guys would check out my website. velezfortexas.com. And if you guys, have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're on every major social media, and my email is listed on my website. So thank you guys so much for creating this space. And hey, be honored to earn some of y'all's vote.
Thanks very much for your comments, Marcus. It was very enjoyable to talk to you and hear your thoughtful answers.